called upon to come and speak here today, I wondered whether there was anything really to be said again, because we have said so much about June 12th. The only observation is that I'm not sure people are listening to us. So when we keep talking about June 12th and how good and how it went, it's like we're just repeating the same story. But I think that for the records, it's good to do what we are doing here today, because there are some people probably hearing for the first time, because they have just some, by sheer luck, they are here, and they probably never heard any of these things before. And as I always say to people, when you speak or write, you are not actually addressing the crowd of today. You are bequeathing knowledge to posterity. Because somewhere along the line, somebody will ask, at such and such a time when this happened, what did somebody like this say? Then they begin to check for it, and at that point they begin to see that actually you did speak, just that nobody listened. So I think it's on that note that I welcome this lecture series. And I want to thank the organizers for finding me good enough to be the first to speak the series. I think I've actually been so favored by the organization, because the book we just presented now, if you look at it, you will see that the foreword was written by me. So I have continued to be exactly the same that I was when it all started at Unicon, and how we went to Abeokuta for a workshop and actually did a formal launching. The topic I've been asked to speak on is just the same theme, legacy of option A4 and June 12 election. When I saw the program and I saw that GD04 will be speaking, I said, well, so it means that all I'm supposed to do here is to just give an eyewitness account and leave the professor of political science to begin to define democracy for us. But I must say clearly that for me, the objective of my speech really is to re-echo the international recognition of the June 12, 1993 presidential election as the best in Nigeria's history. And at the same time, to highlight the efficacy of option A4 as an innovative strategy of effective management of an election process. I believe that at the end of today, we shall all live here and should be able to, when we leave, easily comprehend the real nature and meaning of option A4 in the context of its evolution. I also believe that we should all be able to appreciate the need for political parties to adopt option A4, where in option A4 for party congresses and conventions in societies where especially democracy is yet to be institutionalized. I believe that we all should be able to recognize the spirit behind the international consensus of commendation for Nigeria's June 12, 1993 presidential election. And finally, we should all be able to see why an impartial electoral management body is better positioned to conduct free, fair, and credible elections. But I'd like to start by clearing a little bit of what I call a misconception of the term option A4. I've heard so many people talk about it that it was a system of voting, which is not correct. I think we all have to understand it. there were two systems of voting that we used in those days, open ballot and open secret. So option A4 was not a voting system. It was an arrangement which made it possible for election results to be known on the spot at each stage, and which also made it possible for people to evolve from grassroots to the highest level. And at each stage, an election had been done, a result had been announced on the spot, the person who won at that spot had been known. And therefore, we were able to know the difference between results and declaration of winners. Today, the media tend to think that they can only announce declaration of winners, which is wrong. And it is one of the reasons why people are able to rig, because we wait to announce declaration of winners. We have a duty to announce declaration of results at each spot. So when a result is actually announced by the officer delegated to do so at each stage of the four standards, that is world, local government, state, and national, the results there should have been known. Now, one of the reasons why this is important is that if the results of the Taraba election was announced in Taraba in 1993, the question of whether that result had not come would not have arisen. It was announced, but it was not publicized because journalists were waiting to announce who is declared winner. And I think we also know the difference between who is declared a winner and the election result that was announced on the spot. In this age of rigging, that difference is very important. And journalists should learn to publicize results that were announced by the delegated official, not necessarily where it has been collated and somebody had been declared winner of the entire election. So we need to understand what option A4 really is. It wasn't a voting system. Some people even say it was open ballot. It wasn't open ballot. Open ballot was used to do it. And open secret was later used to do it because people were criticizing that open ballot does not allow the sanctity of the voter. That is, it exposes who you voted for, and therefore removes that sanctity that should have been an election. So we should not make the mistake of taking option A4 to be an election kind of voting system. Now, having said that, let's proceed to what I would call the significance of June 12th. I just have one simple significance, that June 12th was not only the best in the history of Nigeria, all elections before it had problems. All elections after it had problems. So it was a watershed. It's very easy to know the difference. Before June 12th, we had elections in 1959, 1964, 1979, 1983. All of them had problems. In 1959, political parties poured acid into the ballot boxes of their opponents, and the ballots were burnt, so nobody really knew the result. In 1964, many people won election because their opponents were driven away and arrested and hidden, and they were declared unopposed. In 1979, we had what looked like a great election, maybe because it was conducted by the military. But there was a snag, 12th to 3rd, and I'm sure we all remember it. In 1983, so many people won with landslide. That is, there were more votes than voters, as in the case of Emeka Ihedioha's situation, where the man who won after him got more votes than voters. So these were the kinds of things that happened before June 12th. After June 12th, all the elections that have happened have also had problems. There are very many, and we cannot afford to list them today. But maybe we just take one or two. In 1999, we had an election that some people clapped for, but Jimmy Carter, the former American president, who was leader of the observer team, told us that there were more voters than the votes declared. that the voters they saw at the polling booths were not as many as the results that were now declared in the end. And that goes and tells you a lot of what happened. In 2007, the Senate President at the time, Ken Namani, held an international press conference where he said he was number 3 man in Nigeria, but he couldn't vote. So outsiders were wondering, what kind of election is that number 3 man could not vote? So it was a big damage. In 2011, I don't think we have had a situation such as 2011 where so many people were killed because of election. In 2015, we did not really know the process that was used. In some parts of the country, they were using electronic, some parts they were using incident form, in some parts. So you could see that there were problems that you couldn't trace to June 12th in many of these elections, both before and after. So I think that June 12th stands clearly. It's not something that we can be disputing. Now, what was special about June 12th was the nature of the Electoral Commission. The operatives were highly trained. You are all witnesses. To the extent that we now said, let us also train our journalists, those who cover us, because we're training ourselves. We're getting people to understand what it takes. It's not like today where you go to vote and the presiding officer does not even know some of the things you're asking him. So training was not there these days now, especially as many people were recruited hurriedly just to come and do some other assignments. In our days, there was uniformity in operating procedure. It's what you do in Kaduna that is done in Calabar. So we knew who was to do what, where, when, and how. There was also unity of direction. Everybody followed that same line of the late Humphrey Mosu as the leader. He led the way, and we all followed. He always called us to say, President Babangida has assured him that if our elections are free and fair, all of us will give you national honors. And we're so excited because national honors in those days, not like now, when it is now quota system now, you know. So everybody was happy to work. Besides, electoral tools and devices were not temperamental. I'm sure you all understand what I'm trying to say. And most importantly, our own electoral commission did not have politicians as members as you have today. So if June 12 was exceptional, it stands for itself, it speaks for itself that it should have been so. There were other issues like settlement of election results, election disputes. In our days, the judiciary was not allowed by law to stop an election from holding. What it could do is that it could nullify an election it considered poorly conducted. That was why when Basi Ikpeme tried to stop the Electoral Commission, we raised an alarm that the law does not allow that to happen. Secondly, the judges of old were more pragmatic, and it's good to give credit to whom it is due. I remember the Honorable Justice George Oguntade. On one occasion, we had a case in court, and the court had assumed jurisdiction that it could stop the results. And went to appeal. And Honorable Justice Oguntade said, when a court takes steps to do what it does not have powers to do, there's even no need for appeal. There's even no need for appeal. And that was the case we brought up on the eve of the June 12th, when people were saying, oh, somebody has stopped us. And we said, no, they cannot, because the law setting up the Electoral Commission says no court can stop the election from holding. In those days, There were few errors here and there, maybe technical errors in terms of the disposition of election disputes, but the higher courts sustained public confidence because they always overturned the wrong decisions. Today, we don't know the level where the wrong decisions are. We don't know whether they are the lower courts, higher courts, or lateral courts. But in our days, the lower courts were the ones that had problems, and the higher ones resolved those problems. Now, how did June 12th end? I think this is important because Professor A-4 is only going to give you what some people told him. But I want to tell you what transpired during June 12th. About 36 hours to the election, Justice Okpebholo issued an order in the middle of the night, stopping us. And as I had made reference to before, it didn't make sense to us because no court had right to stop us. And we made that same point, and governments agreed with us, and the election went on. Now, when the election was halfway through and results were coming, in fact, everybody had known who won, we were stopped. I was stopped from continuing to place the results on the big boards in front of the Electoral Commission. I'm sure you remember. Good. And then Nigerians are saying, why did you obey the second ruling when you did not obey the first one? Now, there's a difference. The first one was an effort to stop us from doing our work. The second one was a nullification of a result. And Justice Saleh, the Chief Judge of Abuja, who gave the second order, did not just give an order. He issued a bench warrant of arrest to arrest Professor Wosu and his officials. Now, this point now had gotten to where you are now talking about self-preservation, where you are now talking about the liberty of the individual. Now, what was prominent at this point that really made all of us a little bit unhappy is that the Attorney General of the Federation, the late Clement Akpata, who had led the team that reminded the whole nation that the court could not stop us, was the one who served the warrant of arrest on us. So in other words, we were now on our own at that point. It was clear that government of the day had disowned us, and we were just like orphans. There were so many stories that were going around. Some said Professor Wosu was slapped. They saw one check that somebody gave him, etc., etc. There was nothing like that. What happened was that the Electoral Commission was suspended. And Professor Wosu and others could no longer come to work. Those of us civil servants who could go to work, in the evening we'll go and meet them in the house, and then they will give us chicken and all this. We all sit down there and we're eating and enjoying. Where the stories of slap and all of that was coming from, nobody knew that. But the important thing is that because of that suspension, the commission was now unable to continue with what it would have loved to do. But the civil servants continued. We had a young man, Buhari Bello, who was our director of legal service. He went to a court of appeal against Justice Saleh's order. The day the court of appeal was to deliver the judgment, and we all knew what the court of appeal was going to say from the process that had continued, that was the day an unsigned statement, a sheet of paper, went round to say that June 12th had been annulled. That rendered the verdict of the Court of Appeal irrelevant. There was even no opportunity anymore for the Court of Appeal to say anything, because when we resumed in court that morning, we were all now told June 12th had been annulled. So events had overtaken the court order. So those who keep talking about, oh, the NEC people could not do anything, they were afraid or they were not courageous, they did not understand what was happening at all. And it's important that wherever they are, they should understand what happened. and stop the idea of blaming the wrong people. I mean, the last one that happened, which really made some of us very unhappy, was an effort to honor Professor Nwosu, and people in the National Assembly were saying that he didn't have courage to do what? It was not the role of Professor Nwosu to annul or stop annulment. His role was to conduct election. He did. The international community said it was the best. So how do you come to blame him for an item that was outside of his own work? Annulment was not an electoral commission's work. It's not us that annulled. It's not us that could have stopped annulment. Those who could have stopped the annulment were part of the annulment. Even the winning party was part of the annulment. As soon as they realized that the military wanted to stay, everybody was scared. And so those who won even ignored their own victory. I'm sure you all know that many of them were now ministers in the military government that came after. You know, when you see people who have guns that could not object to something, then you say, Tonnie Iredia, whose most dangerous weapon is a kitchen knife, is the one that should face the military and say, no, you can't annul. I think we should learn to be more charitable than we have been. What is the effect of what I've said? It's what is the fate of democracy in Nigeria? Haven't treated June 12 the way it was treated. Where do we go from there? And what do we call what has happened now? I think that this is the area where you all need to listen to A-4, who will be telling you about what is democracy. Me, I'm not a political scientist. I'm a journalist. My understanding of democracy is not about those declarations that people attribute to American former presidents, etc. I know that every leader claims to be a Democrat. Even Idi Amin said he was a Democrat. So I don't know the meaning of democracy. What I know is what the attributes of democracy look like. I know, for example, that in a democracy, there is sovereignty of the people. The people matter. Anybody who is in government is supposedly representing the people. And therefore, you cannot be seen to be doing something that is contrary to the wish of the people. In a country where the representatives of the people are bigger and higher than the people, it's not a democracy. I know that in a democracy, there's the rule of law, which everybody knows to be equality of every person before the law. If you have some people that are different from others in matters of law, you are not a democracy. I also know we have free and fair elections. And we have seen how elections are in Nigeria. Are they really free? Are they fair? Are they credible? This will tell you whether we are in a democracy or not. And then we have majority rule. In a democracy, there must be majority rule. It is the person that has the highest votes that can constitute a government. That's what is majority rule. During the Jonathan administration, the Governors Forum, Nigerian Governors Forum, had an election to choose their chairman. One person scored 19 votes, the other person scored 16. The government recognized the one with 16. So you see what is majority rule? And finally, in the majority, in a democracy, there ought to be protection of minority rights. But because we have not been doing all of this, we have had problems in this country. We have even had problems handling our constitution. A lot of people complain about our constitution. When you look at what the constitution they are talking about, the things are not even there. I have seen people who have told me, beat their chest, oh, we were responsible for doctrine of necessity. I say, what is doctrine of necessity? The Constitution says that if a president is traveling, he should hand over to his deputy. If he didn't hand over, does that mean the Constitution didn't say so? So if you evolve a doctrine of necessity because you are not obeying your own Constitution, the problem is not Constitution. The problem is your adherence to that Constitution. Now, what do we see today? We see the merger of electioneering and governance segments. There's supposed to be a segment for electioneering. There's supposed to be a second segment for governance. There is no difference now. There's electioneering before voting, during voting, after voting, and during governance. And that is a problem that we need to do something about so that we can be able to go ahead and do some good things in life. I believe that if we can do that, we'll have little problems. I also think that we have had an end to what I call collaborative federalism, where in a federation, somebody in one party can be friendly with somebody in another party. When I say friendly, they can have policies that look alike. They can afford to do those policies together, not for the benefit of the people. That is collaborative federalism. But when somebody now decides to collaborate with another person and he tells me that the only way he can do it is to defect to the party of the other person, then something is wrong. It means we don't recognize collaborative federalism, which we ought to. I see many governors, especially those defecting now, I see them as the same as headsmen. Exactly the same. And the reason is this. You see, headsmen, they move about and destroy people's crops. And when you talk to them, they say, oh, I have freedom of movement and freedom of association. So a governor takes the vote belonging to party A and moves to party B, and he says, I have freedom of movement. All right? Whereas you are moving with somebody's property, which is stealing. And somebody tells me, oh, it's not in our constitution that if a governor moves to another party, he can be removed. Nobody is saying they should be removed. They should be stopped from moving because the vote belongs to somebody else. And it's as simple as that. If we have a proactive judicial system, you should be able to tell a governor that, look, you are free to move up and down, but this vote you are taking is not yours, so you can't take it. That's pragmatism. I think June 12 should remind us of true democracy. The chairman of the occasion has already said so. For me, if we want Nigeria to improve, we should have a system where presidents and governors should neither be partisan nor serve as party leaders. You can only be partisan before you become president or governor. When you have become president or governor, you can no longer be partisan because those in your party, those outside of your party, those who are your friends, those who are your enemies, all came together to elect you and you become the president of the people, the governor of the states, of the people. You cannot afford to say what we hear today, that a PDP governor went to visit an APC president. There's no APC president. There's no PDP governor. You only have the governor of a state and the president of the nation. So if we want peace, one of the things we should do is to go back to the system where a political party is separated from people who have become statesmen so that we can have our way. I also think that if we want to stop the idea of unnecessary litigation and all of that, we can also recognize that justice is not about only plaintiff and defendant. There are more parties than those two people in justice. Justice about the plaintiff, justice about the defendant, and justice, importantly, is about society. If justice is going to harm society, it will not be justice. So we must always put society in mind when we are talking about justice, not just the litigants. I'd like to end up by asking NAPOC to be more enterprising. NAPOC should exercise its potentials to its maximum. The chairman of the occasion has already said, or somebody else, I don't know who said now, that NAPOC is not about the founders. NAPOC is about political correspondence, better past and present. We ought to have had them here so they can understand and follow where you stopped. Because there's so much that the nation needs to be reminded of. And it cannot be the NAPOC of old that can do that. The NAPOC of today must be bold enough to tell us that our elections are bad. They should be able to tell us that we want INEC to be accountable. INEC cannot conduct election, and you go to court, and you that did not conduct it, you are the one being required to bring the details. And the INEC that did it is hiding the details. And then you come to court and say, INEC has not given me, then the court issues order, give them. INEC itself should be accountable. It is an institution. The NAPOC of today should remind the nation of some of the things we are missing. The Honorable Justice Mohammed Lawal Uwais has just left us. He served for long. He is remembered for many of the suggestions he has made, but nobody listened to his counsel. INEC is not, broken down to its efficiency level. There is no election offenses tribunal. There are many things that there are none. And if we do them, we will have a greater opportunity. We need to tell our people, that is the NAPOC of today, needs to tell our people that only credible elections can bring up visionary leaders. We need visionary leaders. When we have visionary leaders, policies, projects, and programs that benefit the public will be effectively implemented. Ladies and gentlemen, while I say thank you for inviting me, I want to leave you with this one sentence. Nigeria needs strong institutions, not strong men. Thank you.